Alright, so today we're going to be talking about which RF lenses I acquired for the Canon mirrorless system first and why. So it's definitely not uncommon to get questions about which RF lenses I'm using. And beyond that, I also get a lot of questions about whether someone should get one RF lens over the other RF lens. So the reason I'm making this video is just to share my thought process and my own personal journey in acquiring RF lenses. They are very expensive, so you definitely have to put some thought behind, which ones you want to acquire first, and if you really need the RF version or if you can just stick with the EF versions. Okay, so the first RF lens that I acquired is the RF 24-105 f4 lens, and I actually got that in a bundle with the Canon RP, which I got for a really good price. Given the value of the RP at that time, I think I got the 24-105 for around $500 or $600, which was pretty amazing and is still pretty amazing. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about each lens, but if you haven't seen my video on the Canon RF 24-105 f4 lens, definitely check that out. In general, I think it's a great all-purpose lens, and I think you can say that for any 24-105 or 24-120 if you're shooting with Nikon. But this lens in particular is awesome because it is an L series lens. So you have the weather sealing, the constant aperture, the awesome build quality. You have that control ring on the end, and you also have those amazing coatings that Canon puts in their L series lenses to help with the flare resistance and stuff like that. So unfortunately, in order to acquire some of my other RF lenses, I did have to sell the 24-105, which I do definitely miss that lens from time to time. It's definitely amazing for event work, and I also use it a lot for travel photography. So if I was going backpacking, I would definitely just pack that and the R6 or the R5 and I'd be set. And to be completely honest, another reason I sold that lens was I anticipated the value of the 24-105 f4 RF lens to drop a lot quicker than the like the professional primes and the professional zoom lenses, like the 2.8 version zoom lenses. I don't know if that's just because people see the 24-105 as like a kit lens, but it's usually the case that that lens will drop in value quicker than the other professional lenses. So I just wanted to kind of unload that while the value was still high so I could put more towards the other RF lenses. Like I said, I definitely miss that lens, but I did find that I get more use out of the other RF lenses. Okay, so the next lens that I purchased is the 85mm 1.2 lens. So this is the standard version, not the DS version. It would be cool having the DS version because I do like how that lens renders the image, but I didn't want to take a hit on the amount of light that was coming in the lens and the autofocus, so I just stuck with the standard 85. So this definitely was an impulsive purchase. I saw it for a really good deal online and I bought it right away, and I'm really glad I did because I use it a lot. I probably would have been fine with the 85mm f2 version, but I will say this 1.2 version has the USM autofocus motor in it, and that autofocus system is able to move all of this glass in a really quick manner. And that is really practical if you are doing a portrait session with moving subjects, like family sessions with moving kids. The autofocus is really snappy and really accurate. It's definitely the fastest autofocusing 85mm and fast 85mm like 1.4 or 1.2 lens that I've ever used. Yeah, but I had to get this lens. Even when I shot Nikon, I always admired the pictures coming from other photographers that shot Canon with the older EF series 85 1.2. Obviously, this lens is a good choice for portrait work, but even more than that, this lens is awesome for landscape and astrophotography. Because in terms of the overall image quality of the lens, like the resolving power, the corner to corner sharpness, the correction in chromatic aberrations. This is definitely the best performing RF lens that I have. Now, lugging this around for landscape photography is probably not ideal, but if you are in a situation where you can use it for a nice landscape photo, I definitely would try to do that because the image quality is insane. And this last point also goes for the 50mm 1.2, but just having that 1.2 aperture is really helpful, even with the awesome IBIS capabilities of the R6 and the R5. It's really nice having that extra flexibility with the amount of light that you can take in to the lens. So okay, so the next lens that I got is the 50mm 1.2. So as you can tell, this lens is a lot smaller than the 85, which is a reason that I really like it. I wouldn't consider this a small 50mm, but relative to the 85, it's a lot smaller. I had to get this lens because 50mm is my favorite focal length, around the 50mm range. When I shot with Nikon, my most used lens was the 58mm 1.4G lens. And I absolutely love that lens, and I still love it, but it just so happens to be that the RF 50mm 1.2 is my favorite RF lens. And that's not only because it's my favorite focal length, although this lens does not beat out the RF 85 1.2 in overall image quality. I do prefer the rendering of the lens over the 85. Canon did a great job in balancing lens corrections like chromatic aberrations and vignetting in the lens just enough so that it felt like a modern lens, but also it kind of retained a vintage sort of feel to it. The lens has these really nice characteristics like really smooth bokeh, a slight swirl around the edges if you're shooting wide open, and really nice natural vignetting if you are doing portrait work. And all of these things together just kind of make it more pleasing for me to shoot with this lens over the 85. And that's if I was in a situation where the focal length didn't matter too much. And just to be clear, just because I said the 85mm does beat out the 50mm in terms of overall image quality, that doesn't mean that you won't be really impressed when you see how well the 50mm performs. To my eye, the 50mm lens does beat out the RF zoom lenses. In terms of image quality, you can definitely tell it's noticeably sharper. So after the RF 50mm, I decided to go with the RF 15 to 35. I was really choosing between the 15 to 35 and the 70 to 200, and while the 70 to 200 was more appealing at the time, I wanted to get into video work more, so I thought I would get more use out of the 15 to 35, and I was definitely right about that. It came in handy for quite a few video projects so far, so I'm definitely glad I went with that lens first. And I figured I could hold out on the 70 to 200 because I had the 85mm lens. If I really needed the extra reach, I could always just put the camera in crop mode. And I think I was shooting with the R primarily at the time I got the 85, so I figured the 4K on that camera had a crop anyway, so I had the extra reach anyways. I am recording on the 15 to 35 right now, and I have a Pro Mist filter on there, so it does soften up the image a little bit, but you can kind of get an idea of what to expect for video. It is usually more contrasty and sharper though. I love that the RF 15 to 35 has the Nano USM autofocus motor. It's definitely ideal for video work as it has that really smooth and quiet autofocus. That definitely comes in handy if you are using a shotgun mic right on top of your camera so you don't pick up that autofocus noise. The only thing that I wish worked better on this lens was the IBIS in conjunction with the R5 and the R6 when you are shooting wider open is really wobbly. If you're planning on hand holding the camera and moving around, then definitely just turn the IBIS off because the wobble in the footage that you get makes it unusable. I think though at 35mm you can start to hand hold it and use the IBIS system, and it looks pretty good. I usually just stick the camera onto a gimbal if I want really smooth footage with the 15 to 35. One other thing about this lens is I wish there wasn't so much vignetting when you shoot wide open. And it really only affects me when I'm doing astrophotography. It just takes a little bit too much time in Lightroom. Even if you put the auto correction on for vignetting in Lightroom, you still kind of get like a weird effect. And I found myself just spending a little bit too much time having to correct that. That being said, I understand why the lens is the way it is. It's awesome that you can get that focal range and the maximum aperture of f2.8 in a package that is so light and relatively small. Okay, last but not least, and hopefully not last because I hope I get some other RF lenses in the future, but this is the 70 to 200 f2.8 version. So I probably should have got this lens before the 85mm 1.2, honestly. For the type of work I do, it's way more practical having that 70 to 200 focal range. And it's also nice that just like the RF 15 to 35mm lens, this lens has a nano USM autofocus motor, so it's great for video. And actually, I think this lens has a dual nano USM autofocus system. It probably has that because there is a considerable amount of glass within the lens, but Canon wanted to make it useful for video and have the nano USM systems. Another great thing about this lens is that the image stabilization within the lens plays really nicely with the IBIS in the camera. Although image stabilization really sucks with the R6 and the R5 when you're using wider angle lenses, it really shines when you're using telephoto lenses. So that 70 to 200 range is really perfect if you want to hand hold your camera and get stable footage. But the biggest reason that I picked up this lens was the size and the weight of the lens. If you've ever used a Canon EF version or a Nikon 70 to 200 f2.8 lens, you know how large and heavy those lenses are. So this lens, you know, this is compared to the 50mm. So it's really not that much bigger. So having the ability to stick this into a day pack that can only fit like 2 lenses and a camera body is amazing, because I usually take, if I'm just going hiking or backpacking or traveling, I'll take the Canon R5, the 15 to 35, and the 70 to 200, and I'll have this relatively compact setup that actually fits in my bag that delivers amazing results. And one other thing that I like about this lens, and I do mention this in my video that I will link above, is that the bokeh on the lens is really nice when you're shooting wide open. So and that's not typical to my experience with 70 to 200 lenses. The out of focus area rendering is more reminiscent of what you would get from a prime lens than on a zoom lens. So being able to have that quality of image when you're shooting portrait work is awesome. This lens also sharpens up really fast when you stop it down, so it's perfect for landscape too. Okay, so those are the RF lenses that I have and the order that I acquired them in. Just some quick side notes. I did rent the RF 28 to 70mm lens, and I absolutely love that lens. I did do a review on that, but I just didn't see how it fit into my workflow. I might try to acquire it someday, but right now, since I'm not doing, you know, too much event work or wedding work, I really didn't see how I could justify spending that much money on a lens, especially when I already have my other RF lenses that cover that focal range. If I acquired it as my very first lens, then things might be very different for me now. But like I said, I just can't find a way to justify it right now. That's it for this video, but if you guys are thinking about acquiring some RF lenses, let me know which ones in the comments section below. And if you already have a set of RF lenses, I'd just be curious to hear which ones you got first. All right, thank you.